I've covered the key areas, now onto the smaller connecting parts and the finalising of the layout to ensure that it's fun to play. You may have already heard me moan about this, but I hate the starting terrorist area in most maps. Let's see what you have to do in defuse matches. The terrorists should rush a bomb site, plant the bomb, and the CTs need to either prevent them from doing so or retake the site and defuse. In other words, T-side of the map is a series of corridors that should lead to the bomb sites or a strong position within the level to help later on. But some maps miss the point. Take Nuke for instance. Let's watch a terrorist run to his first decision as to where he has to go. All of that time was wasted. No choices had to be made, it's simply an opportunity for players to block their teammates. I don't see any justification for this area. You could argue that if they started further forwards then they get to the bomb sites too quickly, but that doesn't apply in Nuke since you can move CTs an equal distance forward from their spawn, shaving off a couple of wasted seconds every round. Inferno's approach is a bit different. I hate the T entrance. It's a block fest, but it raises an interesting possibility for later on in the levels. By having terrorists start here, they're an equal distance away from the bomb sites as CTs. That clearly won't work for a defuse map. By delaying terrorists with this start passage, it means that once the bomb is planted, CTs have two routes of equal distance to choose from to rotate to the other site. In other words, the terrorist side of the map still has a use later on in the rounds. This makes retaking the site more practical than say Dust 2, where the terrorist spawn is a bit too far away from the action for CTs to consider it when rotating from one bomb site to the other. I'd be interested to try Inferno's strategy in future maps of mine, but for Disparity I held the belief that where terrorists start should serve as a series of choices to get to areas of interest, and as the map developed, I ensured that these areas were as short as possible to increase the amount of time spent fighting rather than running. What's great is that because Disparity is smaller than most maps, CTs still have time to rotate all the way around to T-spawn to the other bomb site if they do so wish. The Dust 2 and Inferno's playable areas are roughly 4,000 by 4,000 units. Disparity is just 3,000 by 3,000. This has a number of knock-on effects, particularly on the far routes to either bomb site. I like to reward players who decide at the beginning of the round on where they want to go. In Disparity, you can go to long A or to the door at B and have cover until you pretty much arrive at the bomb site. Alternatively, you can hedge your bets with the routes closer to middle where you're more likely to be spotted or to engage in a fight before reaching the bomb site. Or you could simply head to middle, with no intention of taking a bomb site but instead contesting the strong central part of the map. Every route has a purpose and different pros and cons. As long as every corridor caters to a style of play, it's okay. If there were corridors that were seldom used, I would try to make them more appealing with cover, or would make them shorter. If nothing else worked, I would delete them entirely. Cover is a difficult one for me. It's too easy to want to spam it everywhere, but leaving some areas open makes the map simpler and can sometimes improve gameplay by forcing players to have to rush or resort to clever grenades to protect their advances. From an early stage, I wanted this map to feel slippery, as though you could point in a direction, close your eyes, run and end in the corner of the map. For this I used the player clip tool and in some areas the clipping tool, which also blocks bullets and stuff. These are both invisible blocks in the map. I place them in areas where things jut out of walls or where there's a step that's slightly too high to climb up manually. I hate getting snagged on things as I'm trying to run across a map, so by adding these things into a level, players can more easily slide without having to think about it. I always think that these are underappreciated and often go unnoticed in maps. Take CS Italy for example. Most people will jump to get up this bit, but you can manage it simply by running at it. You have the clipping to thank for that. And I think that just about covers the layout and the planning that went into it. I can't stress how important it was to playtest it with other people, particularly 5v5s whenever possible. If I had more time, I would have replaced the bomb sites with spawn points just to see how it played after the bomb had been planted, and would have tried 3 to 4 different layouts for each bomb site, and would have chosen the strongest of those to work on. Instead of using generic crates as cover, I would have used particular props from an early stage, since they all have slightly different dimensions and levels of cover, but at the end of the day, I can't complain. I'm happy with how these stages worked, and playtesting towards the end of the project more than made up for any weaknesses that developed between this stage and the end. Disparity has one of the strongest layouts that I have ever created, and it has given me absolute confidence in this method of designing and playtesting a map. If it hadn't been fun to play, then I wouldn't have been able to justify finishing it to myself. I'd like to thank everybody who gave me feedback throughout this stage of development. You can find their names on the gravestones in Bombsite B. I now have to begin the detailing stage. In my opinion, the most boring and long-winded stage, and probably the one that most people give up on. Thank you for watching. And as usual, let's finish this off with random playtesting clips. Here's Hazardous Monkey showing off his admin skills by spawning lots of pointless stuff and by turning things red.
I just want to give myself a fire drill quick.
This was when JFCC spotted the view down middle for the first time and worried about possible gameplay implications.
Oh, hey Philip.
Oh really?
I think
That's
that
nice.
the spawns aren't in a good position because there's a little spot where any skilled sniper can easily snipe people who are coming out of CT or people who are coming out of T.
Sometimes escaping the level is more fun than playing it. Here, people talk about how rubbish and buggy my maps are.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I remember Ball 4 was super. I think you actually submitted a version of Ball 4 in which you could get out of the map, and then I told you about it, and you're like, oh, whatever. Yeah, well, it was I climbed the pillar, and then there was a part of the map that didn't have a full invisible wall, so you could just... You had to do pretty tricky stuff, and if you got it wrong, it could take like a while.
This is what you have to put up with constantly on TeamSpeak.
User left your channel. User left your channel. User joined your channel. User left your channel. User joined your channel.
What is going on?
And this was the epic quest to work out that the picture on the wall was of Che Guevara.
Yeah, I think that's the guy's name. It's like Sergey something. Yeah.
Who?
Sergey. Lol. To all the campers around the world.
What are you talking about?
That. Come to a bomb site. A second. He's like the guy on the wall. I think it's Sergey.
No, no.
Who is that? Is that
Shay. His name's called Shay. Sure, it was like Shay, something like that.
Well, I stabbed him in the face, so...
Sorry about that, Che fans. We know he's actually an awesome guy. Let's listen to a debate about the map's balance.
You think this is CT or T-sided map? It looks like it's CT-sided. It's easy to stop them to rush it.
I don't know, T's got a pretty straight run onto the hill.
Yeah, they can rush it, but it's easy to defend.
And finally, lots of testing for the up alley down middle. Thank you for watching.
Just got a headshot with blood.
Philip, can you help me later with one thing in the console? No, it's just a simple command. How do I make something, a command, and the command with the text? Like, I want to say, every time I use Nuke, I say, I write Nuke. GG.
Oh,
Just
that's close. Oh, man. No way. No way. 2v1. On the ramp, on the ramp.
Wallbang! Wallbang!
Oh, such a hacker.
Shut Cowbine up! Oh, you could kill me! Oh my god.
It's so fast paced, it's ridiculous. I actually hate this guy, I think it's shit.
Oh, I got an idea.
Move it.
Hacker gun. Yeah, come.
Terrorists win.
What? I couldn't even see you on my screen. On my screen I couldn't see you. I'm confused. Oh! Do you like my smoke hacks? Oh!
Terrorists win. Bomb has been planted.
Oh, where is it, Philip? This was all a ruse.
Terrorists win.
Let's do this, guys.
Terrorists win.